You are already an amazing storyteller. You tell great stories, you make awesome battles, but you worry that your players are not immersed enough. Sure, you can describe the forest floor and the canopy overhead and the mix of rain and clouds to the best details possible, but you don't feel like the room you're actually sitting in helps with that description. Because I can describe the coolest high fantasy tavern that you've ever seen with the smell of the alcohol and the sound of chatter and the sights and sounds, but all you need to do is look at the pile of dishes on your desk to know that that's not where you are right now. And that's exactly how immersion can be broken at D&D games. And there's sometimes no getting away from that. But how do we make immersion at our D&D games, and any TTRPG for that matter, as best as possible? Well, here's a few examples of how I do it, and maybe you can do them the same way or something even better. First things first, because I am not a Theater of the Mind player, I use physical miniatures. So when I'm setting a battle map, if it's going to be something truly epic, I want it to visually look epic. To start off, I know that this next encounter is going to be taking place on a beachfront. So I'd grab two of my ChessX battle maps, one having a more sandish tan color and the other one being just blue, and overlap them as such, making for a beachfront and then the water. Now this combat has a bunch of random NPCs littered all over who have crashed along shore after their boat was sank by a sea monster. So I'm going to litter the battlefield with a bunch of random things. Some miniatures will come in later, but we have things like a boat, some chests, some backpacks, some random weapons just kind of strewn about, and then you know what, there's also a floating cart just over in the seabed. After that, I have to represent a cliffside of this sandy beach that people cannot go past, with a small little opening that our player is going to be coming through. To do that, I use some 40k terrain that I have built, but not yet painted. Like most of my 40k stuff. And some could say that that's immersion breaking because it's not rocks. It's clearly like 40k cathedral gothic interiors. But you know what? I'm not perfect. Now once the map's laid out and I put the NPCs roughly where I think they should be, now it's time to place the creature. As you can start to tell, I'm placing some tentacles because the creature that my party is going to be fighting is actually a kraken. And after marking where the tentacles and where the actual creature is going to be, I can then put the model away so that when my players come in, they see that there is a battle that's going to happen. They see there's a bunch of random people who may be helpful, maybe not, who knows, but they don't get spoiled on what they're actually fighting yet. Plus, it's far better when you describe the environment and they can see the environment, and then as you describe the tendrils coming out of the water, you can then put them on the battlefield as you're explaining it. Oh, joy. So much fun. The next way I immerse my players is a bit of an oddity that really only works for my situation, but hey, it might work for you guys, so I'm going to show it anyways. Now, I've actually converted my living room into my D&D room, which means that I have two entranceways into this space, one from the kitchen and one from the hallway. Now, the kitchen has this giant arch that connects the two rooms, and I thought about this one day randomly when I was going through a bunch of stuff that I was going to be selling, and I found an old projector that I had, and I immediately thought, wait a minute. I can use this. I can do something cool with this. And this is what I now do for really epic encounters or even just cool roleplay moments in a different area. The first thing I do is I take an old white bed sheet and I pin it up over the archway. And you want to make sure that you pull it tight and stretched out so there's no folds or wrinkles in it. After doing that, if you have a projector, you're going to want to set the projector up on something high and far away. Now, it doesn't have to be an old PA system randomly sitting in your laundry room. That's just happens to be what I have, don't judge me. But set up the projector and you're going to want to shine the light from the projector onto the back of that bed sheet you just put up. Next, what I'm using in here is a very old iPad that I got for dirt cheap off of Facebook Marketplace, but if you have other devices you can use, then by all means, go on YouTube, search for animated wallpapers or even just scenery that fits the aesthetic you're going for and put that onto your projector. For example, in this one, I looked up 8 hours of beach scenery. Now, ideally, you want something that is quite long in length that you can loop endlessly if it's at least an hour or two, and then also something that does not change scenes constantly. It's on one scene for a long while. Once you do that, you want to dial in the settings for your projector so it fits onto the screen, goes from top to bottom, and looks wonderful. And don't worry about all the extra stuff that's spilling out onto the walls, as you can see here, because your players and you yourself will never see that because it's being projected onto the white cloth. Only what's on the cloth is what's going to be shown to everybody else on the other side. So once your projector looks a little something like this, then go around, go to the other side where you and your players are going to be sitting and take a look. And I honestly think it looks awesome. It gives a little bit of like a giant window doorway, if you will, into the world that you're sitting in. And like I mentioned, we built a beach encounter. So here's some waves crashing upon the beach in our archway. Now you notice Wingless, all the lights are turned off. That's the only way that actually looks good. And my players aren't going to be playing in the dark and I can't read my notes in the dark. And you're right, all the lights are off. But when you turn the lights on, it's still very bright and still very readable as a beachfront. But Wingless, you say, those lights are blue and orange. What's going on there? How very keen-eyed of you. Now let's talk about lighting. Now I'm gonna be upfront with you. Lights are probably the most expensive part of my entire D&D setup. I have two very large hue bulbs that are in the center of my ceiling that the light mount disc thing doesn't fit over top of them anymore. So they're just exposed as is. And then around the room, I have a bunch of other lights mounted in small little lamp desk clamps that I've moved around the room to give a surrounding environmental feeling. I also have two more Philips Hue bulbs underneath the desk for a little bit of an underglow effect. Because goddammit, if I can't do it on my car, I'll do it on my D&D table. This adds so much to my D&D playgroups experience. How much, you ask? Well, here is a campfire during a thunderstorm. Pretty neat. Now, in order to do all these cool effects with all these lights, I use another program called OnSwitch. It has a yearly subscription, which is not cheap. I think it's about $60 to $70 a year, but the developers are always adding new effects. They're always tinkering and they're always creating more and more stuff that I'm constantly using. So between the subscription model of OnSwitch and all the cost of each different Philips Hue bulb, yeah, it's quite pricey. And you can do what I'm doing here for much cheaper. I know you can. This is just the way I'm doing it. Next up, let's talk about audio. Most DMs tend to play just kind of Skyrim music or Baldur's Gate music from a little Bluetooth speaker. And you know what? That is fine. That's okay. I'm a bit extra and I go a little bit more into it. No, I don't use those PA speakers. Yet. For now, I just have a little stereo Logitech set of speakers on my desk where I'm DMing from, but I also have another pair of speakers at the end of the room. Now, the speakers I use close to my desk are for the important audio stuff, like combat music or just regular high fantasy calming music. Any type of music related stuff is usually coming from the speakers next to me. Ambience is coming from the speakers at the back of the room, which I have more spread out. Things like rain or wind or monster roars or murmurs in a tavern, all that kind of audio is played through these speakers. And the way I do that is I have a small little Bluetooth device plugged into these speakers, and then the ones by my desk are plugged into my music player. And for Bluetooth, I just use my phone and play sound effects from that. And none of it is played at an overly loud volume. It's all kind of under my voice. The most important thing is that the players can understand what I'm telling them and that the players can also hear themselves. But underneath that, there's the awesome combat music, and underneath that is the murmuring and the ambience. Couple that with the lights that are going on, the combat battle map in front of them, the window/doorway into the world that they're in, and you put that all together and it makes for an incredible immersive experience. But we have one last thing, which I am honestly not great at, but I want to improve upon. Because the next possible thing you can give your players for full immersion is touch. Because at this moment, we have visual, we have audio. So let's add touch. When your players find something cool, a unique magic item, or a random strange trinket, if you tell them about it, they can envision it, and it's cool, and you give them a piece of paper. Because when your players find a cool magic item, or a trinket, or just something interesting that they want to touch and hold, you can tell them about it, and it probably goes a little something like this.
You find a strange artifact.
It doesn't have the same weight as if you were to do this.
You find a strange artifact.
Now they have a way better connection to that item, because not only did you describe it to them, but you physically showed it to them, and then you can also give it to them.
You find a strange artifact that looks like this, and after you cast Investigate, you find out it does this.
And when you combine all of that with the lights and the music as well, it can turn into a moment like this.
You find a strange artifact.
Now granted, you don't want to do that with every single cool magic item the players come across. Like, you don't want to be handing swords over top of your DM screen, or maybe you do, that's up to you. But if you can do this with a few select individual items, It gives them more weight, more purpose. The players will value them more. And because the players value them more, the characters will value them more. Because if I tell a player, you find a bag of teeth of all different varieties, and the first tooth on top is quite large with a bit of what looks like red gemstones embedded into it. You probably have an idea of what that looks like in your head, right? And your idea of what that looks like might be better than mine. But if I give you a bag of teeth that you can feel and hear and hold, and you reach into it, and the first tooth you pull out is in fact a giant tooth with red inlaid on it, is this better than what was in your head? Is this more important now to you because you have something physical to hold? I think it is. Now, outside of the light system, I don't do everything in this video all the time. It is a lot of extra work, and I think it dilutes the impact it has when you do it all the time versus only on certain moments. I do not go into the extensive detail for every combat fight like I do for that Kraken fight. I do not always put up that bed sheet and put a projection on for every single place that my party goes to. I do not have physical items for every single trinket or magic item my players come across. Nor should you. It is a lot of extra work, it's a lot of extra money. The two things I do always do though, is I always have the lights appropriately set to the area that they're in, and I always have the music and the ambience appropriately set to where they are. And even just with those two things, just the lights and the music alone, I think adds so much to the immersiveness of your D&D game.